And there it is. There it is. South African hands aloft. They have come from behind and they will defend their Rugby World Cup title.
3, 2, and 1.
Hello and welcome to a very, very special episode of Elite Rugby Banter. We are finally here. It's the finals week of the Rugby World Cup. We've been building up to this for the last 4 years, since the Springboks beat England 32-12 in the final back in 2019. How can we forget? But this week, it's all about New Zealand. The Springboks were victorious on the weekend. New Zealand beat Argentina themselves, and we'll get into all of that and preview the weekend action. But first, let's say hello to my guests. We've got Andrew and Ant as usual. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. Had a wonderful week and weekend. I watched the rugby in a little tiny pub in Wakkerstroom. So the metropolis of Wakkerstroom in Eastern Mpumalanga, in the middle of flipping nowhere. But it was a vibe. And yeah, I'm really excited to be talking finals and that the Springboks are there, obviously.
Yeah. How tensed were you in the final? How crazy was it in the pub?
Yeah, tensions were running high, as were the bar tabs, and yeah, I think we'll get into that a bit more later.
Yeah, I had to have a couple of tequilas, I think, just to keep me a little bit more calm. But Ant in Cape Town, how are you doing?
I mean, I'm good, but I had completely the opposite experience from Andrew. My weekend was incredibly stressful, obviously, given the Springbok result.
Yep.
And got far too little sleep. The only thing that I'm thankful for was that the game at least was on a Sunday and not this was on a Saturday, not a Sunday. Because otherwise today would have been a complete write-off. My watching experience though was we went to had a braai at a mate's house, but it was reserved for people that take two things very seriously: their braai and their rugby. And just the quality of the meats that were being produced there. The fire started about 2:00 and just like platters of ribs and like savory bourrels and steak and T-bone. Just like it was a complete harvest table of just beautifully braaied meat. And then the rugby was taken very seriously. I think we were at least 10 brandies deep before kickoff, and I lost count of how many Springbokkies we'd had throughout the game. So all artfully poured. So it was all around a very, very good experience.
Sounds the right way to do it. Yeah, it sounds like the right way to do it, and to get you prepared, all the brandy and Springbok shots. I think I had a few of them too. They were on special wherever I was, and it's like, I don't really like that sort of minty shot. They taste way too weak and sweet, but they were going down well. Yeah, but before we get into the semifinals, we also had the opening of the URC this weekend. So the South African teams involved, the Sharks went down to Munster. Unfortunately, the Bulls hammered the Scarlets, quite a convincing win. And then the Lions mounted a very impressive comeback against the Stormers, but fell just short. Andrew, you watched the Stormers match. Any first impressions for the season?
For the Stormers, it was a very promising first half. And for the Lions, it was a very, very promising second half. That scoreline should have never been that close. The Stormers were on complete ascendancy, and then the Lions, literally or figuratively, came roaring back into the game. There was like expansive rugby all around. I had quite a lot of skin in the game in our fantasy draft. I had Evan Russ and Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu, who both went quite well. Sacha especially, who deserves a shout out for his wonder try, where he had his little keepy uppies to keep the ball in possession, which was incredible. Go watch the highlights if you don't know what I'm talking about. Nice to see Warwick Galant back and doing Galant things. I think it's going to be that back line is going to be super stacked when Willemse and Lebok return. It's just going to be insane. So it feels like a lot of creativity and yeah. Very, very fun to watch rugby in stock for us there at the Stormers. But the Lions, I think, could take a lot from that. Phil, you're obviously a Lions fan. They showed a lot of characters come back when the game looked like it was beyond them, and I thought it was going to get really, really ugly. But their players stood up eventually. Is that just first game rust? What do you put that down to?
Yeah, it was a strange one. Like, sort of there was a good start, I think. After PJ Buerta scored the try, I was feeling pretty positive, but then Stormers just ran in like a whole number of tries in quick succession. The strange thing was that the Lions started a lot of their good players on the bench, like especially some of the young players. Like Ruan Venter came on and made a real impact. Even Morne van den Berg.
Henk van Wyk.
So and Henk van
Henk van
Wyk obviously
Wyk.
came on and scored a try. So I'm hoping that next week we'll see more of these players start and we'll be able to build a bit more. But yeah, it was all a little bit loose, I think, and that allowed the Stormers to really run in those tries. But yeah, pretty promising. Like the youngsters putting their hands up is always nice to see.
Well,
So
the Lions did end up outscoring the Stormers 5-4, if I remember right. So it was really Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu's two long-range 55-meter penalties that won them the game. So
yeah.
hopefully a bit of a wake-up call for the Stormers that they can't go to sleep. But yeah, as a general supporter of South African rugby, it was good to see the Lions come back, actually.
Yeah, and the Lions have to go on tour now, so they've got a few difficult games up in Europe. I think the Stormers are hosting the Scarlets down in Stellenbosch this weekend, so that, based on the Scarlets' performance in Pretoria, should be a relatively easy match. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Unlucky for them to lose their captain as well. So Salman Murat was drawn with a pec injury, who also happens to be in my fantasy team, or he was until I traded him out this evening. So yeah, he's just like been really unlucky with injuries. He was just coming back from a long injury layoff for his ankle, I think it was, and he was made the captain and all this promise, but he didn't play any preseason, and I wonder how that played into him getting injured potentially. Maybe he's just really unlucky, but there's a good chance he wasn't really match conditioned. So
I feel like a pec injury is not something that you like. That's not like match prep that'll like prevent that or help that.
but
it's
maybe I don't know.
Purely anecdotally.
Yeah. It's just frustrating for him, right? Like he's even been in the Springbok squads. I can't remember if he's got a cap or not, but like he's been right on the edge, and just injuries have just held him back. And like at his age now, he really needs to have a run where, like post World Cup, where he might get more of an opportunity with a couple of other guys moving on or being a bit busier. But this injury is
he
just
was
horrible
the same team as Willemse Lebach Bosch. He was their captain. That was at 2019. So he's what, 24 now?
It could be right. I think he's at least 24. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so Ant, on the Sharks side, I don't know if you managed to watch any of the game. Did you see any of the highlights from their game?
I watched it live, and kind of, to be honest, went out as well as I could have expected. The Sharks scored some tries, but overall we're just overpowered by Munster. I mean, which is, I suppose, if you think about it, the Sharks are playing pretty much a B team considering most of their players are with the Springboks. So like it is what it is. Playing the defending champions away from home in your first game, like you're not really expecting too much. So the fact that they were, I mean, I wouldn't say they were competitive, but they at least did trouble them on the scoreboard a little bit. It's kind of about par for the course, I think. And it wasn't a horrific showing, and hopefully there's a lot more growth and building to come. I think there were some individual performances which are quite nice, but overall, like about on par, I think, given the relative finishes of the teams last year.
Yeah, I think because Munster, like compared to Leinster, don't really lose as much because the Irish players haven't really come back into camp yet. But Munster only have about 3 players who have played considerable minutes in the World Cup, so it's almost a full-strength squad. And like you say, they're reigning champions, so perhaps a pretty tough start for the Sharks, and they're obviously staying on tour, so it's going to be a tough start in any case, just to get some points on the board.
Yeah, and the Sharks are unlikely to see their Boks for quite a while, and they have signed a few marquee players, and the likes of Bongi and Bonambi, he's going to need a serious rest. We'll talk about how tired he and the other Springboks looked this last weekend. Mapimpi's injured. Lucanio Am is there. Hopefully he'll come back quickly because he hasn't played any minutes for the Boks in the World Cup.
But guys like Ox, Eben, Vincent, I mean Sia. I know, so Sia's gone, but like, no, that's half their tight five.
2 scrum halves.
And again, the same issues. The same issues as last year, where the Sharks have a good depth in the front row, but no depth at all in the locks. I don't think that's a gap that they've plugged, unfortunately.
Yeah, and strange to see Fussy still on the bench. He is also Springbok in the Lions tour. Yeah, we saw him sort of get his first cap, and he hasn't really pushed on either domestically or on the international level. So hopefully this season he'll make the Sharks starting team and be able to show a bit more of what he's capable of.
Well, he did at least.
I wonder if it's just it's just a tactical decision that, because he's a flair fullback and they're choosing Chamberlain, who's, obviously a fly off, so more of a kicking tactical option. Like, I wonder if he's just not the player to fit the game plan of the Sharks at the moment. Whatever the game plan is. But it is sad to see guys that were touted as future Springbok players to just be riding pine.
Yeah, well, I saw an article which quoted the Sharks assistant coach. I forget what the name is. Was it Joey Mangalo? I think.
Yes. Last year, yeah.
Yeah, he was saying like Apelele's shown incredible potential and he is a Springbok, but this season will probably decide whether he is a 2-cap Springbok and a 120-cap Sharks player or a 60-cap Springbok, So he needs to really turn the corner this season to put his name back in the hat for that position. Obviously, Willems has pretty much nailed that down now after we expect Willie to retire. But Fussy can throw his name in the hat and at least get into extended squads if he performs. And a try off the bench is not a bad way to start the season if you are going to start on the bench.
Yeah, and new coach, obviously John Plumtree, would be hoping that he could have had a slightly better start, but the season is still young, and the URC isn't won in October or November or this year. Speaking of John Plumtree, his son made his debut for the Scarlets and scored 2 tries up in Pretoria at Loftus. However, the Bulls still won 63-21. Cameron Honeycomb scored 2 tries on his debut, and half or more than half, I think 5 or 6 of our managers in our draft league tried to pick him up as he was a free agent. But it's a good sign for a new number 8. And the Bulls just look like they're sort of purring at this stage, happy with a really positive start.
Yeah, geez, the Bulls' loose forward stocks are really soaring. They've got Marcel Coetzee, who's obviously their captain, but then Elric Lowe, who's also a Springbok, and now this Cameron Honeycomb dude with Markov and Staden to come back, and a couple of other options like Nizam Carr, and they're really looking healthy at loose forward. The Bulls are smiling right now. They also go on tour now, don't they?
They might do. I'm not sure. I think they're playing Ulster this weekend, so they'll be in Ireland on Sunday.
Oh, yeah. So it's a tough schedule for them, but not much to shout home about for the Scarlets or indeed for any Welsh team this weekend.
Yeah, 0 out of 4 for the Welsh teams, which I'm sure Ben would have enjoyed. It's always reveling in Welsh misery. But we move on. And in addition to the semi-finals in Cape Town, currently the WXV2 is taking place. So South Africa played their second game of the tournament against Italy on Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, went down 36-18 and had a yellow and a red card, which impacted the performance, I think. Cesar Hele, who's one of the star players, got a red card just after halftime while the game was still close. But yeah, South Africa, I guess, are like on the bottom scale of the WXV2. They're sort of the lowest ranked team, and they're playing teams that are higher in the rankings and generally stronger. But I guess the sort of game experience and having these matches against better teams will hopefully in the long run be good for them.
Yeah, and hopefully just the professionalism that the Bulls are encouraging starts to flow through as well.
Yeah, and just to mention quickly that I think it was Nolusinda Siso Boy became the highest capped Springbok woman of all time. So well done to her. Unfortunately, on the losing side this time, as quite often happens, but still quite a big accomplishment. So then moving on to semi-finals, we can start on Friday night with the, I would say, lesser even before the matches themselves of the two semi-finals, just in terms of competition and how close the game would be. And unfortunately for Argentina, we saw New Zealand really run away with it and perhaps not be tested anywhere near the level that even they would want. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think New Zealand were that good, or Argentina just didn't come to the table at all?
I don't think either team really pitched up. I mean, we were all saying on Friday that it was like quite a terrible game to watch. And, it's so weird for a team, that won by 30, 40 points to be criticized for a poor performance. And I think, the All Blacks just do what they do, is they capitalize on mistakes, and Argentina were incredibly poor. But I don't think the All Blacks played particularly well. And we were saying at the time that, like, other teams wouldn't have been scared of that All Blacks performance. And yes, we will come to the obvious elephant in the room very shortly about the Springbok performance. So we're not getting too full of ourselves. But yeah, it wasn't the type of performance All Blacks. It wasn't like this dominant All Blacks machine that we've seen in the past, or we've seen in other games with similar scorelines. I think it spoke much more probably about Argentina just being like England level bad rather than the All Blacks particularly good.
Yeah, Argentina just really shouldn't have been there in the first place. They were lucky to be on that side of the draw, and they've not played well this tournament. They had lost to England quite badly and never really recovered after a fairly promising pre-tournament showing. So they sort of were true to form and just didn't play all that well. There were periods where they threatened New Zealand, got over the gain line, got into the 22 and threatened to break through. And then I felt like they had this game plan of little chips and grubbers over the top to kick into space and threaten that way. So they had possession for 10, 12, 15 phases, and then would try this little grubber, which just never came off. And they lost possession. New Zealand had an easy exit, and they started again. It was like brainless rugby. I don't know what the tactic was there, but it just absolutely didn't work. And every threatening opportunity they had, they just like completely nullified themselves by pointless kicks.
Yeah, I think they'd be really disappointed just not to be able to cross the line and get a try in the game at all. I mean, it was 6-12 actually after 35 minutes. So at that point, before the floodgates really opened up, they would be happy to be in it. But Shannon Frizzell scored a try just before halftime, and then I think took the sort of wind out of their sails a bit. And then in the second half, it was one-way traffic. And even a Scott Barrett yellow card couldn't stem the flow of things at that point. And I think New Zealand didn't even bring a player back on after the yellow card period ended. So they played the last 5 minutes of the match like voluntarily with a man down. So that's an interesting way of taking it, but it also shows the lack of threat that Argentina showed. Special mention to Will Jordan, who scored a hat-trick in this match, and he tied the record. He goes equal with Brian Habana, Jonah Lomu, and Julian Severe on 8 tries in one tournament, meaning that he needs 1 against the Springboks to take the record all for himself. And I'm sure not just Brian Habana, but millions of other South Africans will be hoping he won't be able to do so.
Well, if Richie Manga hadn't been such a stingy bastard, then he should have had 4 and broken the record in this game. There was like a clear run-in where Richie just decided to hang on to it and go inside, which, I mean, I hope he bought him a beer afterwards, because that was criminal. The game had gone. So
or maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just has too much respect for Lomu and didn't want to see his record be taken away.
People really do love Jonah Lomu. I was watching, I think it was the official podcast, the Rugby World Cup one, and just the people mentioning his name and the sort of awe and or the aura of his name and people talking about him is still amazing. Dan Carter was saying that he's still like the most amazing player that he played with. So that's saying something. But I think Moanga said after the game that he didn't want to give the record to George just so he's a young player. He's still got something to strive towards and maybe a bit more hunger in the final. So we'll see. We'll see if that rings true or not. But hopefully South Africa can shut him down.
Yeah, I mean, it would be disappointing. Would we be give them the record if we beat them? Would we take that as a trade?
Easily. I mean, I think that's should be, except for Habana again, maybe. But I'm sure even Brian Habana would be happy to give his record away if it meant another World Cup and the first team to score 4 tries. I mean, all World Cups. The first team to get 4 World Cups. I think Habana would trade that away.
Surely.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, Habana said he's pretty happy for his record to be broken anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, whether that's just Habana being silver-tongued and the people's favorite is a separate comment, but.
Yeah, so any closing comments? Maybe just in term, we'll get into the preview and what we expect from New Zealand against South Africa, but I guess a relatively disappointing semi-final, especially given the high quality and closeness of the quarterfinals. Like you said, Andrew, Argentina sort of happy to probably be in the semi-final, but obviously the manner of defeat at this stage was really disappointing. But I think for the All Blacks, they would have also just wanted a little bit sterner of a competition. Like they got a relative rest, but they're not as match hardy as the Springboks would be.
Well, yeah, it was a similar situation in that semi-final, and I think it segues nicely to the other, where New Zealand had to get themselves up in a huge way for Ireland, and I just don't feel their guys were quite at the races. In a very similar way that the Springboks also suffered from fatigue and lethargy and maybe not motivation. I think that might be a step too far, but they really got themselves up 1 week before and weren't able to replicate the performance. So,
are you saying that carrying bags is a better motivator than lifting up a Land Rover? Or do you think that that's what tied them out?
Yeah, maybe they should stop lifting cars and start lifting weights. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll move swiftly on to the Springboks game. It was in a very wet Paris on Saturday night, which we spoke about in one of our groups about whether that would be beneficial or not for the Springboks. And in hindsight, easy to say no, but I guess even at the time, like we've shown that we've been happy to throw the ball at least at the beginning of the game. So I think the rain firstly wasn't ideal, but we should have probably been a bit more prepared for it. But England raced into a 6-0 lead, and then we fought back a bit, but 12-6 at halftime. Owen Farrell scored a very nice drop goal just after halftime to make it 15-6. And given how close the game was, things were not looking great at that point. We looked like we were struggling to get into the game as much as we would have hoped. England, to be honest, dominated large portions of the game, but in the second half, our substitutions, including Ergias Neyman, who scored the only try of the match, brought us back into contention. And then our subs really had a positive impact, most notably Oxenchair, and then with Andre Pollard able to kick the winning penalty. So very, very stressful, but all's well that ends well. And yeah, just how confident were you guys that we would be able to fight back, or were you thinking we've blown it, we've left too much on the table so late in the game?
No, I think the game went. I mean, obviously we were expecting on paper, thinking the Springboks should walk it comfortably. But I mean, I think if we were going to have a flat performance, it went kind of according to plan. And this is what I was saying, at least when people were worried about getting overconfident. Like, yes, England dominated us, but they're not a team that's going to punish you on the scoreboard for their dominance. The fact that they were only ever 9 points ahead of us, considering the dominance, that's really not an unassailable lead, and we obviously assailed it. So I think like that, the fact that we were only ever 9 points behind made me not confident, but comfortable that we could chase that down. It wasn't a lot of points. It wasn't like they scored 2 tries against us and we had to score 3 to beat them. Like we just needed 1 try. So I think we all knew that our bench was the better bench, particularly our scrumming forwards. Like they'd started their stronger scrummers, and when we brought on, we knew that Ox would be the difference maker. Like we would crush them in the second half, because I've said it repeatedly, Genge and Sinclair are bad scrummagers. So yeah, I mean, look, they left it a lot later than I was hoping, and it was far tighter than I would have predicted, but I think the combination of England just not being a good team at scoring points and our bench is kind of the narrative that we were predicting if it were going to be a close game. Which maybe people weren't predicting in the first place, but the worst case scenario I still thought was a Springbok win.
That's very optimistic of you. The worst case scenario, I think either Ant is the most optimistic man alive, or he has very little imagination. A lot could go wrong.
Well, but it did, and we still won. They dominated us, and we won the game. So I'm just saying, I think we played about as badly as we could have, and we won the game. So
I hear you.
You
Andrew, your thoughts?
I do think a lot of credit has to go to England. Like, they played very negative rugby, but it was actually the perfect tactics against the Springboks in those weather conditions. It was very smart. We were saying off air about how Manu Tuilangi, who usually is the source of their go forward ball, and game plan route A is just Tuilangi bashed up in centers, much like we used Allender. He had 3 carries, I think, in 80 minutes. The ball never got past the forwards and Farrell, and if it got to Farrell, it got kicked, and they kicked very well. So their halfback pairing, at least in the beginning, kicked a lot more accurately than our halfbacks. Reinach and Lobok are made for flat, dry tracks, I think, and this didn't suit them at all. And to yank Marnie at 31 minutes was controversial, but I think ultimately the right call. This is the game that is made for Andre Pollard. Defensive mishaps, disregarded. It felt like a really good tactic from England. Our skills out of the high ball were called into question again. We were put under a lot of pressure. Cheslin took a few good ones, but other than that, Freddie Stewart really outmatched the Springboks on this. So, I feel like they played smart but unattractive and negative rugby against the Springboks, and it nearly worked. If it wasn't for our replacements, particularly Ox and Chair, winning us like 3 or 4 scrum penalties in a row, we wouldn't still be in this competition. So we owe him a debt of gratitude. And I see Woolworths South Africa gave him a year's supply of chocolate cake in recognition of his contributions to South African rugby. So good on them. That's well deserved.
Yeah, that's a lot of cake. I hope Woolworths are able to come through and fulfill their promise. But yes, get that man a cake.
I feel like you're worried about their profitability. You're worried about them going concern.
I feel like Ox can probably go to any sort of bakery in South Africa at the moment, and people will buy him cake. He had made that much of a positive impact. I mean, even speaking to some people at work, who are more casual rugby followers and only really watch the World Cup, they were pretty impressed just with how much of an impact and how dominant he was in the scrums. And even that last scrum, looking where there maybe is a little bit of controversy, some people arguing that he was slightly lucky in that one. I think you just have to give him credit, like the picture that he painted in all the scrums before that. Like, he was so dominant that even if it was a 50-50 call, he was always going to get that one, because he had absolutely demolished the scrums prior to that. So yeah, really happy with that.
The pin on that last one, it wasn't Ox, that was on Genge for putting his knee down and then bouncing up on the angle. Like,
Yeah,
which
no,
are completely
exactly.
fair calls. Like if you
Which-
actually just look at the footage, like the screenshot obviously is Koch on the angle, but that's because he's been pushed there by Genge,
Yeah.
and you can
But
just
you-
see quite clearly Genge
And-
dropping to the knee and then bending.
But also Ben O'Keefe explained it very clearly and very succinctly in terms of what happened. So it's one of those where, of course, it's a game-changing decision. So everyone's going to try and scrutinize it to the nth degree. But yeah, at the end of the day, Ox came
It
on.
does seem like a stupid one to get upset with, considering they got obliterated the previous 4 scrums. And like everyone's like, yeah, no, we properly got annihilated those scrums, but no, this one, the ref got it wrong. You're like, mates, like either take an issue with getting drilled at all of them or just chill. Like,
Sure. Yeah, and just quickly, I saw there was a stat from the match where that the Springboks didn't concede a single line break against England in the match, which is pretty crazy, but perhaps speaks a bit more, like you were saying, Andrew, the sort of English game plan with not really looking to attack and make that sort of impact on the defense. So more sort of playing for points and playing for territory.
I mean, genuine question, did they run at our line once in the game?
No.
Did they threaten our try line at any point? Were they in our 22? And this is, I mean, I genuinely am trying to think back if they were actually in our 22.
I read the stats earlier. They had 4 22 entries and we had 3. So
Okay, yeah, I mean, I know we got to their try line a couple of times, but yeah,
that's a dour stat for a game of rugby, full stop, though. Like the amount of rugby that was played between the 22s and with very, very little creative play. It was just kick and recover if you can and try and force penalties with close range pick and goes and plays off 9. It wasn't nice rugby to watch at all from either side.
Yeah.
But England were engineering that, and we really played into the only game plan that England could beat us with, which is kind of frustrating as a Bok fan that we weren't more adaptable to that. And then we undermined ourselves further by stupid mistakes like skew throws at the lineout and simple knock-ons and miscommunications. It was a frustrating game, and if we play like that again next week against an All Black side who aren't at their best, but they've shown they can put teams away, we will get put away if we play like that again next weekend. But I don't want to jump the gun, but I don't think we will.
Yeah, I definitely think we've left a lot in the tank, even if it felt like it took a lot out of us in this game. But that begs the question, like,
feels like a very big call.
But like the weather was bad on Saturday, but the forecast was also bad. Why did we go in with that game plan and then have to make the early change?
I mean, there's not really an explanation for that. There was a lot of people supported the consistency in selection. When we picked the same side again, thought, okay, well, here we go. And apparently that was the first time in 60 test matches that a Springbok side has gone ahead without a single change to the lineup for the 23, which is eyebrow raising in the semi-finals of a World Cup. And ultimately, I think everyone can see in retrospect there was a need to rotate players. The guys were tired from that gargantuan effort in the quarterfinals, which was needed, but some of the players should have got a rest. And definitely, if we had a secure weather forecast ahead of time, Faf de Klerk and Handré Pollard have played in wet weather conditions a lot more than Kobus Reinach and Manie Libbok, and their gameplays and styles suit wet weather play. I don't think we would have changed outside backs or centre pairing, but definitely half backs, and it showed. And I think that's ultimately why we yanked Manie early. And my only concern now is, if we get a clear weather forecast and we want to play Manie, what has yanking him early done to his confidence? Because he's a confidence player. He's a young guy. He's got a lot riding on his shoulders right now. He's only played maybe 15 tests for the Springboks. About that. Maybe not even
not very many.
That many. I don't think it's even 10.
10, 12 maybe. So It's a lot to ask from a young guy. They say he's pretty unflappable, but that will be put to the ultimate.
I mean, I heard the interview with him afterwards, and he seemed pretty chilled. And you've seen him, like the way that the coaches have backed him. Like, I don't think he would have. I think he'll quite comfortably recognize. Look, it wasn't his night. They came on and did the job, just like all the guys. Like Ox is. He obviously was far more dominant than Kitsoff was. And I don't think he's going to be like, oh, I need to start now. I don't think he's going to take it as a offense not start. I think like that Springbok culture, and it's 100. It's so much of it is team first. I don't think there would be a worry about Lebok feeling like he is not trusted by the coaches or anything anymore.
Yeah. I mean, we've said over the years that it's one of the best things that Rassi and Jacques have managed to do is create that squad dynamic where people are fully supportive, at least from the outside, it seems so. Whether they're on the bench or whether they're, not in the match 23 at all. So hopefully there's no issue there. But yeah, I mean, like you say, Andrew, in terms of confidence, it's always going to take a bit of a hit. It's not nice for anyone to come off after half an hour before even half time. But I think this weekend, the forecast is again for rain, unfortunately, for Lebak at least, but probably all of us. So it definitely, I think, will have an impact on squad selection. And I'm not sure when we're expecting to see the squad, maybe Thursday again. But yeah, before we get into that, maybe any other comments on the game itself before we look ahead to the weekend?
Just don't let it be.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the comments feed into with probably the preview and stuff, which is just the flatness of the players. Do we rotate? Do we not? Because guys like Etzebeth that came from like career best performance to probably one of his worst, quietest performances. Yeah, but that'll all be feeding into the preview chat.
Maybe before we get into the preview chat, we can just mention that we're not sure of if there's any seriousness or any outcomes yet, but Bongi was reported by England and Tom Curry for, I guess, an accusation of a racial slur even.
What did you say?
So Tom Curry alleges that he called him a white cunt. This has been spoken a lot in not just social media, but also, not tabloids, but other more reputable newspapers and such about the translation issues. Obviously, cunt in Afrikaans means side, as we all know, it's being relatively decent Afrikaans speakers, some better than others probably. But yeah, and white is obviously the color England were wearing. Don't know if it makes too much of a difference in terms of the way that he meant to use it, but based on someone like Bongi, you'd think if he was trying to insult him, that wouldn't really be the language he would be using. But it has caused a little bit of a storm in a teacup. So I don't know if we're going to hear anything about it soon, but it must have a small impact, hopefully very, very small on the preparation for this week.
Yeah.
I feel like if there's one player that wouldn't be bothered by this, it would be Bongi at least.
Yeah. Look, at a minimum, it's going to have an effect on the team environment, just having it out in the media and a little bit of a media storm around this singular issue. But I don't think it's going to distract the players too much. I don't think World Rugby is going to have any proclamation in time for a World Cup final. So, I mean, there's a universe in which we go to a World Cup final with Dion Fourie as our starting hooker, and that's not a universe we necessarily want to live in. But I don't see that being the reality at all. There's a lot of mitigating factors. There's no evidence. Bongi hasn't denied it, but he hasn't confirmed it. And in the Springbok environment, with the whole multiracial representation, like, it's highly unlikely that was said with any racial undertones at all. So I don't think he's the most cerebral player. He might have let that one slip, but I think there's enough mitigation that he'll probably get off the hook, and this will be a non-issue in a week's time.
Yeah, I can't see this going too far, to be honest. I mean, it's literally just Curry's word against anyone else's, and I think there's enough, as you say, language explanation that even if it gets somewhere, I don't know. I've got my own views on it, but I feel like this, the language used, was less racially charged than potentially other slurs could be. I suppose that doesn't really mitigate anything, but like, yeah, I don't see this being an issue longer term. I think there's enough stuff to be, so whether he did say it or not, or from a purely rugby perspective, I don't see it being an issue.
Yeah. I mean, from the rugby's perspective, I think more of a potential issue for the Springboks is that Bongi played 80 minutes. I think partly it was because obviously wanting Deon Fourie on as a flank, but also I think his scrumming prowess was also pretty crucial in those later periods of the game. But given that he's now played 80 minutes in a semi-final, expected to play the majority of Saturday in a final, it's asking a lot of him. I mean, he's a very capable and strong player. He's a hooker who generally gets his basics right. His scrumming and his lineouts are his strong points. But are you guys worried that we've had to push him a little bit too hard, and maybe Deon Fourie as a backup option is still not an ideal replacement, especially in the front row for big scrums?
One word, yes.
No, I disagree. I don't think Deon, apart from 2 early engagements early in the competition against Ireland, has done anything wrong at hooker. I don't think he's done anything to deserve negative criticism. His lineouts have been good. His scrumming since then has improved a lot. He's dynamic around the field in ways that I think even Bongi isn't. He set up the Erges Snyman try, for instance, with a really nicely timed and really intense breakaway, getting over the gain line and giving Erges the chance to break the line and get over the whitewash. So I'm not that worried about him being a replacement hooker. I don't think he's a starting hooker quality just because he doesn't have that international experience that, or nearly anything like Bongi does as a 65 test Springbok.
Yep.
I don't think he's a terrible backup, but
sure.
Bongi's with the whole Springbok team. We've had an off day, and I think the guys have enough motivation and enough team culture to pick themselves up for one last game, because that's all it is. They need 80 minutes, maybe 80 and a bit minutes over the next week to become world champions. And as South Africans, we have all the extra motivation that other teams worldwide don't have. You're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for your country, quite literally. So I don't see there being a problem getting themselves up if they get the rest requirements right during the week and they manage the players well. Noting what happened over the last weekend, I don't see that being a problem. They'll get nice afterwards.
Yeah, we'd happily take another 1-point win, of course. Just a quick note. The worst line out of the match by a country mile went to Jamie George. It somehow slipped out of it somehow slipped out of his hand, completely the wrong direction. It was on par with Matthew Jalibe's kick for touch in the quarterfinal. It was quite a funny one to see, but I'm sure given the conditions and perhaps one or two other things, it can happen to the best of them. I mean, Jamie George, he might not be the best hooker around the paddock, but his lineouts are normally exemplary. But that one literally slipped out of his hand.
No, that was terrible.
That one was very funny.
But if you want to talk about terrible rugby and in the same breath bad-natured rugby players, can we talk a little bit about Willie Leroux?
We can. So I think I'll take this opportunity, Willie being one of my favorite players. So it's with a heavy heart and with a little bit of sadness that I have to say I was disappointed with not just his performance. I think he could have been better, but he didn't necessarily do anything horrific when he came onto the field. But again, it was the sort of lack of impact that you would want from a fullback coming onto the field late. Maybe providing a little bit of stability, experience-wise, cool head, that sort of thing is what you're looking for. But really his behavior after the final whistle, sort of running straight to the faces of a couple of the English forwards and eventually Farrell, I think, and it really caused the fracas that happened. But as a senior Bok, but even as a Bok, like once the game is done, like I think you sort of have a reputation to be the better man in that sense. Like leave it all on the field, like let go, sort of, let your haunt in terms of he's the strunt haunt, let it out on the field. But once the game is finished, that's just really obviously unprofessional, but also just like provoking and like bad attitude and the sort of behavior that the Springboks have been promoting, whether it's the sort of documentaries, behind the scenes footage, or just what they sort of say in press conferences and stuff. Like that was the complete opposite of what we would hope for. So I think he let himself down, and just the culture of the team a little bit too. So by that, his teammates as well. So I would hope that he looks back at that footage with a bit of regret, and hopefully behaves a bit better in the final, whether he's on the bench or whether he's in the stands.
So he's definitely not starting then, eh?
I don't think that he's starting. But saying that, I mean, if Pollard is starting, I think even if Pollard's starting, he's not starting. But that's generally been the policy that we've spoken about when Pollard plays. It's sort of a little bit of it feels a little bit safer to have Billy at 15, but I don't think so. I think Pollard has a chance of starting. I think that's a good way just to move forward into the next match. Faf and Pollard, there's a very good chance of them starting, especially if the weather's wet like it's predicted to be. Would you guys do that? Would that be the safer option? And having a 6-2 split with Libok and a scrum half on the bench?
I mean, I thought we should have gone 6-2 for this game. I mean, I think Willie didn't add anything when he came on for, I would say, arguably the second game in a row. And I think, again, given how tired our forwards were, I think the split 6-2 would have been a good option. If we'd had, say, Marco van Staden on, then we could have taken Mongi off, moved Dion Free. I mean, obviously the scrum stuff is part of it. But yeah, I don't think Willie had anything. I don't think Willemse had a bad game, so I don't think we needed to have Willie there. So for this game, yeah, I mean, the last time we beat New Zealand, we were 7-1. I think going close to that 6-2 would be my preferred way. I think particularly if it's wet and we want to play forwards dominant, then let's go Libok. Let's go Pollard. Whether that means we have Libok on the bench or not, I think he covers 10 and 15 in the same way, closely enough to the way that Billy does. So maybe we can get away with that. But yeah, I think particularly if it's wet, I think that's also an easy way to justify selecting Pollard without it coming across as dropping a guy, horses for courses type selection.
For sure.
I think
Henry,
a wider
do you
question
agree?
though is, sorry, I'll let you go.
I wouldn't mind it, especially if the forecast is for rain. They're both proven match winners. They both won a World Cup final together, and I feel like there's two ways to defeat the All Blacks, and you have to do both to do it, at least convincingly. And the one is to beat them up front. So as Ant said, that extra forward makes a huge difference. If we can put a Jean Klein or a Marco van Staden on the bench, that would make me quite a bit more comfortable than a Billy Leroux and what he could bring. And the second is you have to cut them down with your defensive systems and not let that backline get loose. So number one, I think Pollard and Faf have the more accurate kicking game than Reinach and Libok, and that helps with preventing counterattacks. That is why Jordan is the leading try scorer for this tournament. And I think with our rush defense from our wings and outside centre, who they weren't really used in the last game because England didn't go wider than 10. That is a big string to our bow. So if you can cover those two things, I think a 6-2 split and a de Klerk Pollard halfback pairing, they definitely lend themselves to those. that being said, we did it differently against the All Blacks and beat them by, well, we scored 35 points and had a really good game with different tactics, but that wasn't a World Cup final and it wasn't in the wet. So I feel like these are different conditions and call for different tactics.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree. And you're going to lead us into the next big thing, I think you're going to say. If you want to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think the big question is, do we do any rotation in the starting pack? I mean, as I mentioned, there's a lot of those guys looked flat. I would say guys like Sia, Dwayne, Peter, Steph, Eben, all had their kind of quietest games this World Cup. And, it's again, it's understandable. We've just come off a massive, massive effort in the French, and we've had a pretty tough run of it. French, Ireland, Scotland, England, kind of 3 of the top 5 sides in England are now sitting 6th. So, if we beat New Zealand, we've beaten the 5 next ranked teams in the tournament, at least by the end of it. So it's understandable, but does that mean we should maybe consider some rotation? Having a guy like, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say, but maybe starting Klein and Archia or something like that. Do you start Jasper because he's maybe got more energy and you bring a Dwayne off the bench? Do you give Quacha a run? I mean, Quacha's obviously been electric every time he's gone on the field. I don't know if we'll do it. I have a suspicion we won't, but I mean, would you guys consider something like that?
I think so. I mean, I spoke, I think, last week before the team was announced, about potentially having Visa even last week and having a bit of a rotation. And I think that might, in hindsight, always a bit easy to say, but I think having Visa starting and having Dwayne on the bench is quite an attractive proposition, given that Visa gives you that energy, which Dwayne doesn't quite have. And coming off the bench, especially if we do manage to have a bit of a lead, I think Dwayne will bring that experience and that calming presence, and hopefully a turnover or two when he comes on against a sort of more tired team. I would definitely be considering playing Visa. I think Jean Klein, I can't see him starting, but I see what you're saying. I mean, even as amazing as he has been for 4 years, pretty much, he did look relatively flat on Saturday. He came off early. Hopefully coming off early is going to help him perform this weekend. I think, like Andrew was saying earlier, you don't need any sort of motivation for a World Cup final. The motivation levels will be right up there, 100%. But physical energy, perhaps you can't control for as much. So I think it's really on the Springbok team to know how tired individuals are and if changes do need to be made. And if that means it's a bit coming off the bench and starting Echia and starting even Klein or someone, I think they need to make that call within the camp and see what their sort of fatigue levels are like. And it's hard, but a World Cup final, they've spoken so much about how it's the squad is the biggest thing. It's nothing like personal if people are getting dropped, and they want to do the best for the squad. So if players are fresher and more up for it, then they should start.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of the impact of if you bring an Etzebeth off the bench. I mean, he's going to be going absolutely hell for leather.
Yeah.
And so it's. But I did hear an interesting comment about Etzebeth and being like, look, the only way you win a World Cup finals if Etzebeth is firing. So therefore, you take him off early and you give him the rest he needs. Just because, look, if you come third or you come second, who cares? So rather put that insurance policy in place, back yourself, the rest of your squad to be able to get you over the line, and then try and preserve your key player, your Etzebeth, your Khaleesi, for the final.
I don't know. I think you manage the fatigue levels this week. I think you're not going to gain a whole lot by running hectic fitness sessions and gym sessions this week. You stand to lose a lot more by overtraining in the last week before World Cup final. I think you do more team analysis, you do more strategy work, stuff in front of a whiteboard and running light sessions on the training field. And I would start the same type 5, maybe some rotation at 8 with Visa coming in for Dwayne. And I think you just manage it dynamically with the subs. If Kitshoff, all he can do is just go hammer and tongs for 30 minutes and you bring him off for Ox can go 50, that's fine. He hasn't had the same minutes that Kitshoff has The same with Etzebeth and Franco Mostert. You manage it based on the player fatigue, and you either go 2 locks or 2 loose forwards. I don't quite know which way I'd go. I'd maybe go rather Van Staden for the hooker cover over Jean Klein, who's unlucky to miss out. But I think you start pretty much the same pack, and you just manage it more dynamically for energy levels, and you manage the recovery during the week. Because if you can get the guys mentally and physically recovered from the quarter and semi, get them up for one last game, I think you're golden. You got to play your best players.
Yeah, I mean, like Ant was saying, in terms of having a down match, rather that we've had it in the semi-final, we've still come through. We're in the final now. Hopefully, whether it's physical energy, mental energy, any of sort of different factors that we need to get completely up and ready for this match will happen after last week's performance. And yeah, I agree. I think this week is more about the sort of more mental side of the game. And you've done all the physical hard work. You've done all the, training in terms of fitness levels and all of that. So just trust the processes and do what you need to do.
Yeah, the only subs I would entertain as a coach would be 8, 9, and 10.
Interesting. And do you
Yeah,
think, are you expecting more?
No, I'm not expecting more. I was just wondering about the option of it. I think I could see the logic in it, but I don't think it'll happen. But yeah, I'm just from a mental perspective, obviously I think that the big, for me, the big trade-off in this game is the energy fatigue the Springboks have gone through. Beating 2 1-point wins is really just mentally taxing and stressful and draining. I mean, if you think about how stressed we all are, and we didn't even actually play the game, the players are definitely feeling it. And on the other hand, you've got the All Blacks, who had a very easy game this week. Yes, they didn't play particularly well, so they might probably not full of themselves, but it was still such a comfortable game. They may be feeling a bit flat, maybe a bit overconfident. I'm sure we'll be driving the underdogs narrative this week very hard. And to be fair, the All Blacks probably have the revenge for the 35-7 in their heads. But I think that's going to be the very interesting dynamic, is managing the energy levels of the Springboks, that mental fatigue versus the maybe not quite firingness of the All Blacks that they would be looking for.
I will say just one other change that I would consider is Arendse for Moody. So Arendse he's a bit of a flair player, but in the 2 knockout games, I haven't seen a whole lot from him. And if anything, we need to shore up our kick defense. And Moody is 1.9 meters. He's solid under the high ball on attack and defense. He's fresh. He has work rate. He's young. I might entertain that change, as much of a hot take as that might be.
It's a little bit of a hot take, I think, especially Kurt Lee, like you say, he hasn't got a lot of opportunity, but he took that try amazingly against France.
Yeah,
he hasn't done much wrong. Moody, because he's so young, it's a lot to place on his shoulders in a World Cup final. I mean, if he's playing opposite one of these New Zealand wings, it's a scary prospect, but he hasn't let us down yet. But I would say that's a big call. I don't hate it, but I think it's just a lot to ask of him, and I don't think Arendse has done enough wrong to warrant thinking about moving him off.
Yeah, I'm with Phil on this. I think we saw what 20-year-old Beelry. I mean, he was also playing incredibly well, but was found out severely in a World Cup playoff game. I don't know if I want to put that kind of pressure on Moody in the same way. I think Kurt Lee's a little bit older, a little bit more experienced. He's got the 2 games under his belt now. He's played in the wet. I just think let's rather just stick with him, because again, he hasn't been bad.
So the one factor that we know for sure already before the team sheets are out is the referee. So Wayne Barnes has been announced as the referee for the final. We know that we're not going to get Ben O'Keefe for a 3rd match. Well, we knew before because we're playing New Zealand. But what are your initial thoughts, guys, about having Wayne Barnes? Is he best possible option, or does he maybe favor a type of play which isn't in our best interest?
Well, if the alternatives are Reynell or Nick Berry, like Nick Berry got the third, fourth playoff, then yes, we got the best option. No, in general, I'm pretty happy with Wayne Barnes. I like the way he goes. I think I don't think there's anything we can want for more than that.
Yeah. The other, I guess, possibility was Gus Gardner, who is also not my absolute favorite. He tends to over-involve himself in the play. And I just have a thing about French refs, so Mathieu Renald's out. So I think Wayne Barnes is probably the best going around at the moment. He deserves the appointment. Well done to him. And I think he's fair, even if you might not agree with some of his calls. I think he's consistent to both sides. I don't think he's volatile. I think he'll be up for the big occasion. So yeah, fairly happy with that appointment. I don't think that's a worry for us.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And looking ahead, one of the things I heard mentioned in last week was the people being surprised that the French chose to support England over us. Do you think that was mostly because of the quarterfinal? Do you think it's a surprising thing no matter what? Or maybe just some more boos for Ben O'Keefe? I think that was quite noticeable in some of the match footage.
Well, Reinach got a death threat from a French fan. I think that tells you about the mood in France towards the Springboks. We knocked their darlings out in the quarterfinals, and they reckon Ben O'Keefe had a fair amount to do with it. So I think the two together were quite volatile. I did notice there were special boos for Eben Etzebeth, who was also a controversial character in the quarterfinals, or should I say Elizabeth, who got some special boos when he was on the big screen. So yeah, not great sportsmanship from the French. I did expect better, but they're clearly hurting. But huge. I mean, for them to cheer for the English, who are their, eternal rivals in everything, that says a lot about how much this World Cup means.
It's interesting. I thought they were just booing everyone and everything. I didn't realize that they had I didn't notice them aiming. I just saw them booing in general. I thought they were just being generally grumpy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I think I just heard Scott Brits mention that he was surprised that there were more boos for the South Africans than the English. So
that's probably on the balance of it. I think there were more boos for the South Africans, but I think there was boos for both.
sure.
But maybe that again just talks to the fact that they don't like either of us.
Yep. So one of the other things to mention, I think it's the center partnership of Damian Dialenda and Jesse Kriel, potentially tying the record for center combinations with Jean de Villiers and Jacques Fourie. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, I think they both go on to, well, if they get selected, of course, if we don't spring a surprise with Esterhuizen or Am or Moody in the centers, then they will, yeah, I think it's 29 appearances as a partnership. So they obviously didn't play together for a long time, but in the Heineken Meyer era, they got a lot of games together, and now the last few games with Am being out injured and then on the fringe of the squad, they've had a lot of games together again. So yeah, a very good partnership. But I just can't quite hold them in the same conversation as Fourie and de Villiers. It just feels like that was a legendary, iconic, charismatic pairing, whereas Dialenda and Kriel always feels like a bit of a stopgap. It's really unfair on, I think, especially Kriel, because he has put in some incredible performances. The quarterfinal probably one of his best ever, probably one of the best ever by South African 13 in my books. And he's never really let us down, but he's never been first choice. He's always been an understudy. But yeah, good on them. I mean, that's a incredible contribution to South African rugby over the years.
Yeah, I think it's a weird one because I think they've both just been so heavily criticized so regularly. And I mean, Kriel for just being more of a show pony than a physical show pony, not a flary show pony, than a particularly talented rugby player. And I think similar for Delendi, that he's seen as a very one-dimensional crash ball player, rather than having a whole range of skills. So I think that probably feeds into that narrative. But the fact that Delendi's got the one record on the one hand with Creel on the verge now, but he's also got the same record on the verge with so he could very quickly be he is the first and second most capped. Well, he's the second and second most capped, but with two different centre partners.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It's quite crazy.
Yeah, so I think with whatever happens, they've done pretty well. And they, like Andrew said, sort of having to fight through some sort of levels of adversity in terms of criticism. I think Creel slightly more, but also Damien Dialenda.
Yeah,
so
if I can jump on that criticism train. Delendi, he is our go forward source. He gets over the gain line, he does crash ball, he's good at what he does. I mean, he's better than literally anyone else in the world at that style of play, and that's what he does well for us. He's not a second playmaker, he's not a flair sort of player. I mean, he occasionally has really good moments, like his kick over the top in the quarterfinal to put France under even more pressure, which led to Dupont giving away a penalty on the 5-meter line. Occasionally he does that, but that's not his mainstay. And against England, he had 5 or 6 carries where they just stopped him absolutely flat. And I don't know that he had a successful gain line carry at all through the whole game. And he is a bit one-dimensional. When you cut him off the knees like that, I don't feel like he has very much else to offer. So for me, having a guy like Libok on the bench and potentially shifting Hundred to 12 or even Willemse to 12 as a makeshift, if that is just not working and you got to 65 minutes and Damien hasn't come up with anything else because Geordie's got his number or whatever, it's an option I like, although he's not usually the player we would sub.
Yeah, I think one of being against Geordie is going to be a massive battle. I think Geordie is a player, obviously New Zealand missed against France in the opening match of the tournament. And he's just such a constant, like he's got such a consistent level of performance. I think he got the official man of the match on Saturday. But since they've moved him to 12, I mean, I think we, in one way or another, had been calling for him to play 12 a bit more often, given All Blacks like strength and depth out wide, fullback and wing. But at 12, he's really come into his own. And I think it could be a point of difference. I'm not saying it will be, but it's a massive battle and one I can't wait to watch between Geordie and Damien Dialenda. Are there any selection potential surprises that you guys could maybe see on the All Black side? Any change basically from the strongest lineups that we've seen in the last couple of matches? I mean, they kept it pretty much the same in the last two, with the exception of bringing in Mark Telea for Feinberg-Mngomezulu, who's again played very well.
Well, I think that's the only real conversation is Feinberg-Mngomezulu versus Telea. I think Telea, I mean, he broke another 14 tackles or something stupid. So chances are he'll get the nod again. He's just literally made of rubber. I don't know. It's impossible to bring that man down.
Yeah, we did manage to control him in the 35-point game before the World Cup. You just cut down his space and you just don't let him dance around like he does, because once he starts, like you said, he's impossible to bring down. So we have the system to contain him. I'm a big fan of Feinberg-Mngomezulu, so I might be siding with that decision. I think the other potentially big call is in the locks. Do you go Barrett and Whitelock? Do you go Whitelock and Retallick? Who gets on the bench? I mean, Whitelock, every time I think he's got over his brainless stupid plays, he does something else and gets a yellow card or gives away stupid penalties. And it was no different in the semi-finals, him giving away that yellow card for just putting up his hand, disrupting Scott Barrett, putting up his hand and disrupting the scrum off. So You're a how many test All Black now, and you're one of the world's best locks. Why are you still doing Thomas Lavanini things?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's maybe what they want off the bench. I mean, we've seen quite often Scott Barrett and Retallick starting with Whitelock on the bench, but I think having Whitelock and Barrett starting and then Retallick coming off the bench is quite a dangerous thing that they could spring on us. I think bringing Retallick on almost in response to us bringing, whether it's Sneman or whether we decide to do something with Etzebeth, it's a little bit of a potential counter. I don't know if it will happen, but that's definitely where they have three really, really high level players and they can play around a bit. I don't think we'll see Scott Barrett at 6. I think that little experiment sort of finished with Frizzell performing as well as he did. But I think given Frizzell's performance earlier this season in New Zealand, that's also an area where we no doubt will want to cut them off very fast.
Well, I've been saying since Frizzell became a mainstay at the All Blacks, I've been saying he's due a brain fade and a red card. So until now, he's proven me wrong, and he's actually been consistently really bloody good. So I'm really hoping the World Cup final is where he finally comes unstuck and goes back to his good old nature that we know he has inside him.
We can hope.
Yeah, and from our side, obviously, we haven't had a disciplinary or major disciplinary issue for a while. Are you guys confident that we've got that under control? Obviously, sometimes little things can happen and things you don't expect, but not worried about a potential card having a major impact on our performance?
Yeah, I think we've proven that, I mean, the only card we've got is that very marginal Etzebeth one. So yeah, I think like we can be comfortable that that's not a factor in our game. Whereas All Blacks, on the other hand, I mean, they gave what it was 2 cards against Argentina, 2 cards against Ireland. They if they don't give away a card, it'll be quite surprising.
Yeah, especially if we put them under the sort of pressure, which, like Andrew, you were saying, that we managed to do in that warm-up match. They were under constant pressure in that especially that first half an hour before. They got 2 yellow cards, I think, in the first half. I think before we get to the spicy prediction for this final, let's quickly take a very short look at the third, fourth playoff. In fact, we're not really going to look at it. I'm just going to ask you for your predictions. We don't really need, these teams don't really want to be there. We don't know what sort of teams England and Argentina are going to pick. So just based on your gut feel, who do you think is going to take third place? Ant, do you want to start with you?
I mean, England beat them convincingly in the pool stages. They played the much better semi-finals. I mean, it would be very weird to bet against them. But then again, Argentina were so poor that maybe Checo will light a fire underneath them and they'll come out firing. The same thing applies that like England can dominate, and they probably will dominate Argentina for large patches, just like arguably Wales dominated Argentina for large patches. But Argentina is a team that can actually score a couple of tries, which, we all know 2 tries beats, 3 penalties, 4 penalties. So I could see Argentina winning it, but I mean, one would think factually it has to be England.
Yeah, and England beat Argentina without a try, I think, in the pool stages. It was just the George Ford show. So
yeah,
I expect more of the same. I think the RGs are just going to play negative rugby because they don't want to be there. They're going to be ill-disciplined. They're going to give away penalties, and England will punish them, which will just reinforce the whole cycle. So I'm expecting a bit of a shit game, and I think England will come out with or they'd be the lesser of 2 crap teams who shouldn't have ever been near a World Cup semi-final.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's kind of crazy. Obviously, lots of things can happen, but if we had the 2 quarterfinals, France, South Africa, New Zealand, Ireland as semi-finals, it would have just been something ridiculous and something amazing. But obviously, weather comes into it. There's a whole lot of other factors. And speaking of weather, we're expecting, as we said earlier, some poor weather for the final on Saturday. That could have an impact. What do you think? How is it going to have an impact? What's the final result? Put your money where your mouth is. Andrew, let's start with you for this one. Can Springboks make it be the first country to get 4 World Cups? Can they beat the All Blacks on Saturday? Will they beat the All Blacks? Will it be a 1-point win? What do you think?
Well, I mean,
You're asking 2 very different questions.
Go one at a time.
Can they, and will they are very different options.
I think can they is obvious. Yes, they can. I mean, they won the last game between the 2 teams. Will they? I think also yes. If it's going to be bad weather, I think the only way the All Blacks beat us is with play out wide and individuals standing up in big moments to capitalize on mistakes and counterattacks and things like that. Especially if there's wet weather, those opportunities are cut down and it becomes a set piece battle and a battle up front and an error rate driven result and attritional, which is all feeding into, I think, the Springboks repertoire. So with the bad weather, but even without the bad weather, I think this result, I mean this game, given that we had that huge statement win in the warm-ups, must be it must play into this. I think the Springboks have worked the All Blacks out. That's going to give them a mental edge. I think they can just, more than any other team in World Rugby, get themselves up, get motivated for games. They're playing for so much more than New Zealand. And I think the Springboks will defend their champion status. I don't think it's going to be the prettiest game we've ever seen. I think it'll be a couple of big moments, some forward dominance, some important penalty kicks, some important decisions that are made. But I'm backing the Springboks by 5-7.
Let's hear it, Ant. What have you got?
It's a great sell, Andrew. I almost believe you. Sure. The playing the All Blacks always makes you nervous. So yeah, I completely agree. The Springboks have it within them to win and win comfortably if they wanted to switch. I think our strengths beat their strengths, and I think if we play to our potential, we probably squeeze them out the game. But I'm very nervous about whether we have that potential in us. I'm nervous that France was our final in a way that the All Blacks Ireland game wasn't quite their final. And that makes me worried that they've got one more bigger performance in them than we do, if that makes sense. I mean, I hope either way it's a really good game. I hope it's not like the England game, but I do worry. That being said, I think, yeah, as I said, this was why it's a good sell. The Springboks have been there, they've done it, they've played a very squeaky bum semi-final and come through and won the final before. The All Blacks haven't. This group of All Blacks, it's only Sam Whitelock. Okay, never mind. There's quite a few of them that have won a World Cup before.
Sam Whitelock's the only one to have won twice, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like Bowden, Aaron Smith, those guys were all there in 2015. So it's hardly an experience All Blacks had. So yeah, I think I'm gonna back them like the Springboks, like I have the rest of the tournament. I think we're gonna do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying since day one the Springbok side has the capability to do it. Whether they will, like you said, and 2 different questions. I think Rassie and Jacques, since they took over, this has actually been their goal. Initially, 18 months out from a World Cup, they didn't think that it was possible to turn things around so quickly. And that win in 2019 obviously was completely deserved. It was a wonderful moment and a wonderful performance, especially in the final. But ultimately, this was the goal. This is what they were looking for. This is what they were building for their whole tenure as coaches, whichever one has been head coach and whichever one is, water boy or whatever the designation there was. So I think that they've built up to this. They've prepared a squad which has been able to, deal with some of the issues, whether it's been injuries or whether it's been players' loss of form. Enough depth to have people in reserve that we can trust and that are capable of coming on as a bomb squad or as an impact maker like Pollard has even in the last test. So I believe as these adverts go. And I believe that it will be super close. I think, like you were saying, and this New Zealand side, it's always nervous playing against them. They're capable of scoring 2 tries in 2 minutes if with none of the ball, pretty much. So I'm predicting a hat trick of 1-point wins, and for all of our blood pressure and tension to be rock high, or that's not the right way to say it. But yeah, a 1-point win. So that's a hat trick of predictions for the Springboks to take it. So what more can we say?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to the first 15, 20 minutes. We've seen when the All Blacks cook up front and we're not up for it, it's very hard to come back against an All Black side, especially if it's going to be wet. If they can get 2 early tries, it's not looking good for the Boks. If we can apply early pressure, get some scoreboard pressure alongside that, then if it's an arm wrestle, I back Springboks. But you can never say never with an All Black side.
Yeah, I think I agree that first 20 minutes, we haven't started well in either of the playoff matches so far, unfortunately. We started amazingly in that warm-up match against New Zealand, so that's what we've got to aim to do, and then just squeeze the life out of them like we know we can. Don't allow them to play the game that they want to play, and we just dominate up front, squeeze the life out of them. We know our pack is better than theirs, whether it's wet or dry, so got to aim to make use of that advantage and not allow their dangerous backs to, get much opportunity at all. Yeah, so there you have it. We've gone for a Springbok win. All 3 of us believe that the Springboks will beat the All Blacks on Saturday. If you disagree with us, please let us know before the weekend, and perhaps we'll even have a rebuttal or 2. But yeah, any final words before we say goodbye, Andrew? And any last words before the final?
No, just go Bokke, and we've been stressing enough for the last 2 weeks, so make it all worth it.
Yeah, it's a World Cup final. I don't know that I've quite sunk into that reality yet, because it sort of feels like we've just made our way here out of destiny or something. It's like I've never really doubted that we'd be here, but now we are here, and it's all to play for. So it's a huge weekend for World Rugby. I'm proud that the Springboks are there, and I believe they're going to go all the way. So yeah, go Bokke.
Yeah, we've been spoilt with whether it's a win or lose on the weekend. 2 World Cup finals and 2 World Cups. And we're confident. We are backing our boys. Hope you are too. And yeah, have a good weekend. And we hope to have a really positive pod next week. Please join us, whether we win or lose. But the Springboks will do it. The Springboks can do it. Both one and the same. Cheers for now.